Okay, it is so good to at least feel your presence here. I can't see you, but welcome. I am Sam Shonkoff. I am Assistant Professor of Jewish Studies at the Graduate Theological Union in our Center for Jewish Studies, and really pleased to welcome you to this special program. This is our third presentation in this series we've had over the course of this fall called Jews and Race. And it has been a really stimulating series in collaboration with the UC Berkeley Center for Jewish Studies, the UC Berkeley Center for the Study of Religion. And it's just been a fascinating journey through different aspects of this crucial topic. With our first guest was Yavila McCoy, talking about issues of Jews of color and Black Jews in the United States context, and in terms of broader issues of Jewish identity and politics. We had Paul Nachme gave a talk on applying critical race theory and the Black American context to studying German Jewish experience in history and religious thought during the Weimar period. And I am so excited to introduce our speaker for today, Marva Shalev Marom, who is coming to us all the way from Stanford University, where she is a PhD student in the Stanford Graduate School of Education, with concentrations both in education and Jewish studies and in race inequality and language in education. Marva doesn't remember this because I was just in the audience, but I saw her give such a brilliant talk at a conference a couple of years ago on her just really, really interesting work on Ethiopian Jewish, Ethiopian Israeli culture and identity, and focusing especially on like this younger generation, and just opening up fascinating questions and food for thought here. So I am just really pleased to turn this over now to Marva, and I invite you, as questions arise, to write them in the Q&A. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A chat box. Please put your questions there, and then we will have time after Marva's presentation to have some Q&A and discussion. So Marva, thank you so much, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so very much, Sam and Dina and Matt. It is such a pleasure and an honor for me to be here with you today and to share a glimpse into the story that I am learning of the Jewish Ethiopian community in Israel. I actually prepared quite a vital presentation, and I'm going to share my screen with you, and I will walk you through the second Exodus as we're talking, and I'm really looking forward to hearing all your questions and answering them to the best of my ability. So here we go. Let's see if this works. Okay, I think we're doing well. Yes. How I wish I could have been with you in the same room right now. But at least when we are all sharing a screen, we can walk a second Exodus together and learn a little about the journey of Ethiopian Jews between religion, nation, and state in Israel. Now, our talk is titled A Second Exodus, and that title is actually not mine. The young woman who came up with it, her name is Yerus. She is my research participant. And before we dive in, I want to take a moment to allow her to explain to us in 20 seconds, what does she mean by a second Exodus?
במסע הראשון שלך זה כאילו באמת, כמו שאמרתי, ידעתי שאני כאילו מי אני, מה המטרה שלי, מאיפה אני באה, איך אני באה, לאן אני באה, בסוף אני מגשים את החלום שלי, ואז בעצם כאילו הגעת לישראל ואתה מתחיל את המסע השני שלך, שפה בעצם אתה מאבד את עצמך, מי אתה, איך אתה, כאילו מה אתה ממשיך לעשות, מה הבא, כאילו מה הלאה.
So, Yaros is telling us she has been through 2 exoduses in her life, and she's only 16. The first exodus was about following her dream and following the footsteps of her forefathers to return to Jerusalem. And her second exodus, however, is an exodus of loss, is an exodus in which she loses touch with the identity and the culture that brought her all the way. And she tries to learn what will be next from where she's at right now. Now, between these two exoduses, the story of Ethiopian Jews is a fascinating story. And these exoduses, in fact, especially the second one, is happening all the time. Let's take November 3rd, for instance. November 3rd was a very big day for America. Mazal tov, you all. It was a big day for Adina Worku, too, an Israeli of Ethiopian descent whose family has been awaiting Aliyah in Ethiopia for almost 25 years. It was a big day because at last, finally and heroically, Israel decided to accept the last Ethiopian Jews, those whose family members have already made it to Israel, but they themselves were never admitted citizenship. News broadcasts all over the world were full of stars of David and glittering eyes and smiles. Only between the lines did it say that merely 2,000 out of the 8,000 Jews who were left behind are going to be let into Israel. They didn't say, those reports, that this same promise of unification of families was made once in 2015, and before that in 2003, and twice in the 80s and the 90s of the previous century, following the pleas of Ethiopian Jews who walked the Sudanese desert by foot to arrive in Jerusalem and fulfill their dream of return. Every day, Adina feels that her pain is invisible. On November 3rd, on her Facebook page, she tried to make it seem. Do you get what it's like, she writes, to live for 13 years without seeing your family? Every day to be in doubt whether you will ever see them again, hold them, sit with them around the Shabbat table. Welcome to my life, not just to my life. Welcome to the lives of many families like mine, who made Aliyah from Ethiopia after years and years of wait. Families who were promised that their siblings and their children will follow, who to this day sit at home and weep over the promises and the lies of the state of Israel, weep for the sibling and the children who never arrived. Who are Ethiopian Jews? Just pick a character from this wonderful photo that Yerus took a couple of years ago and look into their eyes. These people are willing to suffer decades of wait in refugee conditions only to arrive in Jerusalem, Amharic for Jerusalem. Their family members who have already made it to Netanya, Hedera, and Ashdod, they told them that Jerusalem is not made of gold. And even though they were persecuted for centuries for being Jewish in Christian Ethiopia, in Israel, many people don't even believe that they are Jewish. Instead, they call them Black, and that word became very important in their everyday lives. Still, like Adina's parents and her sisters, these Jews are awaiting day by day, year by year, indefinitely. At the same time, the state of Israel is ambivalent about them. And you'd ask yourself why? As the national home for the Jewish people, you'd think Israel will be the last to stand in the way of these Jews to fulfill their Jewish dream of return. But the journey of Ethiopian Jews from Ethiopia to Israel and between Jewishness and Blackness is our talk for today. And it is what I am trying to explore with the help of these amazing 4 young women in my dissertation work. What we will do today in the next 40 minutes or so, we will discuss a part of the research project that we are doing together for my dissertation work, and I'm very, very excited to share it with you. So our agenda for today is as follows. We start with community-based participatory research. Making this research project possible was a matter of redefining the relationship between academia and community. And that thing was absolutely necessary to do this work. And we will look into why community-based research is not only just lively and ethical, it is actually something that is necessary for this kind of work. We will look later into Jewishness, into the lived experiences of Ethiopian Jews. And the lived experiences of Ethiopian Jews in Israel are complicated because being Jewish is both the reason for their arriving in Israel, as well as the rationale by which they are being kept away and apart. Therefore, their experience of Jewishness is inevitably connected to their experience of Blackness. Ethiopian Jews came to Israel on a religious exodus, and like other continental Africans who immigrated to predominantly white societies, they received a new label once they arrived and were redefined as Blacks. Between these two poles, their Jewish identity and their Black reassignment, the experience of Ethiopian Jews is unique. It is both similar and different to experiences of Blackness elsewhere, and especially in America. And that's why I have a few disclaimers here too. We will look into the Jewishness of Ethiopian Jews and to their lived experience, but the vast and complicated Jewish tradition of Ethiopian Jews, I will not be able to address many important and essential parts of it. Just the same, many aspects, essential aspects of what it means to be Black in America in critical race theory, unfortunately, we will not be able to address these things in the limited time we have. Even experiences of other communities in Israel, such as the Palestinian people and Sudanese and Eritrean refugees, and even Mizrahi Jews, we will be able to look through the Ethiopian perspectives outwards, but we will not be able to look at these things as they are. I hope that through the Ethiopian perspective, we will learn something about other shades of Blackness in Israel too. After we finish our agenda for today, the threefold agenda, we will have some time for Q&A, and I'm very excited to hear your questions. So let's begin with community. Who am I and who are these girls and how did we get to know each other? So my relationship with the Jewish Ethiopian community started many years ago. I worked as a Hebrew teacher for recent immigrants during my obligatory army service in 2006 to 2008. I was a teacher soldier, and as you can see, I found myself enjoying teaching guitar much more than teaching Hebrew, and my students felt the same thing. After I was released from the army, I did not want to leave this neighborhood, and so my students and I continued to do educational and musical initiatives in that part of the southern periphery of Israel. Later on, with the help of kids from the local Palestinian community in Jaffa and the local Jewish Ethiopian community, we founded a music center in what used to be a vegetable shop in Jaffa. And this is a picture of how we used to spend our evenings every single day and just playing music outside. By this time, we already had chairs to sit on. And inside, you can see it was very, very small. It used to be a vegetable shop, but it did allow us time and space to listen to some music and to learn from wonderful musicians who came to us from all over the world. I want to give you the shortest glimpse into the kind of dynamics and the kind of vibe that we had in that place. Just 1 second here. So this kind of vibrant music has been my life and my educational journey with the Jewish Ethiopian community. And when I was accepted to Stanford to do a PhD in education, nothing felt more natural to me than to continue the journey with the same community that I started it with. However, when I came back to the neighborhood holding IRB forms instead of guitars, most kids looked at me like the girl in this picture, and no parent would even consider signing the forms or answering my questions about their Jewish origin. Now, I didn't know back then how dangerous it was for community members to answer questions about their Jewish origins candidly. I did not know that such a thing can influence whether or not they ever see their family again. I didn't know many things. I was very lucky when Workitu came to my aid. She said, "Would you stop chasing me with your stupid papers? I told you, I want to do your research and I want to be there with my own name. Let me handle my mother, okay? She's not even your real problem. Your real problem is that you don't ask the right questions, you don't speak with the right people, and generally you have no idea what you're talking about." And this moment was basically the first moment of revelation that I had about this research. I did live a great part of my life in deep connection with the Jewish Ethiopian community, but my story is a different story from theirs. I am an outsider. I'm an Israeli of Ashkenazi descent, and I entered into this community as a music teacher. I saw their experiences between Jewishness and Blackness at the corner of my eye for many years, but I had no idea what these experiences entail. What I had is to learn from the experts what it was about. And therefore, community-based participatory research methods were my way of making this change in the dynamics between academia and community. Community-based participatory research from public health depolarize the relationship between academia and community. They tend to social, structural, and environmental inequalities by allowing all parts of the study to take parts of all in the study design and in the implementation and in all the parts of our work. That's why from research participants, the girls that I was working with for many years and who were my music students became expert participants. They became those who led the research. They told me who to ask, what to say. They signed up the elders on our papers. And when I let them do that, I thought I was helping to do this depolarization. But in fact, what happened is that I learned what our research was actually about. How did this look in practice? We started in Bat Yam, Israel, where these girls are from. And gradually, when we realized that to understand more about their experience of Jewishness, we have to go to visit their family members who are still awaiting immigration in Gondar, Ethiopia. We came there with their parents and their families, and it was very, very, very important for us all. What we did was a longitudinal, multi-sited ethnography that was based in Bat Yam and in Gondar. We have over 150 hours of conversations and interviews that we collected over 3 summers. These inform a larger research project. And we analyzed governmental documents, speeches, and letters to better contextualize what we see in the complicated scene, socio-political, religious phenomenon that is called Israel. So this is what we did, and now I am very, very, very excited to introduce the girls to you. All 4 were born in Ethiopia and made Aliyah as children, and the photos, the amazing photos that you see in this presentation, all of them are theirs. They took them in Israel and they took them in Ethiopia. So let's take a moment to meet them all. This is Workitu. Workitu made Aliyah at 7 years old. She is a poet in the System Ali, Israeli-Palestinian hip-hop group. You must hear them, they're amazing. And she did her national service with diverse youth. She received the President's Award for her excellent work. Currently, she is starting her BA in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. She was 19 when we started this project. Alamnesh was 17 when we started. She made Aliyah at 3 years old. She's a jazz vocalist and pianist, as you heard her a little bit just for a few seconds before. And she represented her music conservatory in Israel in the Red Sea International Jazz Festival last year. Her family is awaiting in Ethiopia to make Aliyah for over 18 years. This is Yerus. Yerus is 16. She made Aliyah at 5 years old, and one of the first things that happened is that she lost her father to cancer the moment she got to Israel. Ever since, she's really keen about biology, and she studies biology in Tel Aviv University in the unit for science-oriented youth. Her family is awaiting immigration, awaiting Aliyah in Ethiopia for over 14 years. This is Serkalem. She is 15. She made Aliyah when she was 1 year old, and she studies film in the local studio. Most of what she does, though, is that she's an activist for women's rights because she's trying to get her and her single mother legal status in Israel, which is a hard job. These 4 amazing young women helped me a lot to understand a little bit more and to get a little glimpse into the lived experiences of Jewishness, of Ethiopian Jews. Yes, because we are not in the same room, I will just recap what we just did. We started with community. We worked, we looked into what it meant to do this research in this particular situation, and how was it actually possible for us to get the information that we wanted to understand a little more about the lived experience of Jewishness of Ethiopian Jews. Now, just a word about the framework of lived experience and lived religion, like why do we look into that? I think that as we all know, there's the tendency in religious studies to champion texts over lived experiences, and this form of study tries to do the opposite thing. It's trying to look into what people eat, what they love, who they miss, what they hang on their walls, and from that to understand what is their religious identity. Now, such a thing is very important to understand the Jewish Ethiopian community, that a lot of its Jewish culture is not necessarily a written one. Just the same, the framework of lived religion is very important to understand Jewishness in Israel, because that little spot on earth, you can cover its entire small territory with the words that have been written about it since antiquity. And I think that especially in this state of affairs, and a place that is so very symbolic, the lived experience, the local and personal and intimate sphere can teach us a lot about the larger phenomena. What am I talking about? Let's start with this. Here they say, you black. There they said, you Jew. I am no black. I am no Jew. I'm a black Jew. Long before we started this research project, Yerus came to the Music Center and showed me a poem that she wrote about her immigration journey to Israel. It ended with these lines. When I read it, I was startled. We never talked about something like this before. Why is a black Jew neither Jewish nor black? I asked her. How come being both leaves you with neither? She laughed and said, go figure it out. So, in order to figure it out, we had to make a little experiment and divide what we see as Jewishness in Israel into 3 different dimensions. We see Judaism as a religion, as a form of religious practice, as a form of faith and belief and spirituality. We see Jewishness as a form of national identity and national belonging, as a cultural identity too. And we see Israel as a state apparatus that is reliant on Jewish law and that looks at Jewish religion as a way to articulate its own political dispositions in our current reality today. Of course, this division is methodical. There are many other ways to divide these great concepts that have been debated upon for millennia. And so we did this because for our work, we saw that the experiences of Ethiopian Jews actually shed light on the relationship between these 3 dimensions of Jewishness. And maybe that is one thing that everyone who Jewishness, Judaism, and Israel is part of their story and their identity can learn something from that. So in my dissertation, in 3 chapters, we explore each side of this triangle. We look at how Jewish religion and how the Jewish nation are in a sort of tension. We look how the Jewish nation and the Jewish state don't always complement one another. And we look how the Jewish state and Jewish religion kind of use each other's vocabulary or power, but actually, there are many things there that don't necessarily say the same thing while they use the same word, which is Jew or Jewish. Today, what we will do is that we will look into the 2nd chapter of my dissertation, which is titled Black Jew, and tries to patiently dissolve the poem that we just read. Why Black Jew is neither Jewish nor black. We look at that in the context of the tension between Jewish religion and between, the Jewish nation and the Jewish state. So our argument in a nutshell, I realize that academia is about spoilers and I should tell you the end before I continue. So there you have it. I'm sorry for the academies, but what we're seeing about Blackness in Israel from the perspective of Ethiopian Jews is that there is an unresolved yet consequential tension between definitions of Jewishness as a religious tradition and national identity and a state apparatus. The experiences of Ethiopian Jews whose identities were reframed in Israel as Blacks illustrates how this tension placed dark-skinned immigrants beyond the scope of both Jewish religious tradition as well as national identity to become the marginalized inhabitants of the Jewish state. Now, this is a very big picture claim, so we will look how it looks in practice. Let's start with Yerus's story that led to her conclusion, from Jerusalem to Yerushalayim. Now, because we are short on time, I will not be able to share her entire fascinating story with you, but only 3 main points. Yerus, when she was 5 years old, that's when she started her journey towards Jerusalem, the key religious symbol of Ethiopian Jews. That journey started on her mother's back, on a 700-kilometer route spanning from their village in the Gondar area of Ethiopia to the Israeli embassy. Now, Yerus did not know how long they walked or where exactly, but she knew one thing, Jerusalem. After 2,000 years, they were finally going home. But when they arrived in Yerushalayim, the first thing that happened was that they had to convert to Jewish religion in order to receive citizenship, Israeli citizenship. Yerus remembers her father trying to inquire, how do you think we are not Jewish? We walked 700 kilometers to return to Jerusalem. She remembers that no answer came. She does remember, though, that they went through some tests, they went through the mikveh, they had to go through many procedures after which they were entitled to Israeli citizenship. But after this conversion process, things got worse. Yerus tried to apply to many schools who did not consider even her application. The school that did accept her in the end was a boarding school, a Jewish religious boarding school that taught her a different kind of Judaism than the one she had at home and required her to teach what she learned to her parents in the weekends. During one of these weekends, a policeman off duty shot and killed her downstairs neighbor. Shocked and enraged, Yerus joined 10,000 Ethiopian Israelis in protest. She held signs that said Black equals second-class citizen. Angry drivers rolled down their windows and yelled at her and others like her, "Go back to Africa." And she froze when she remembered how her mother carried her on her back for 700 kilometers to return to Jerusalem. So, Yerus's story illustrates 3 major intersections of Jewishness and Blackness in Israel for Ethiopian Jews. First is their conversion, the conversion policy which conditions their Israeli citizenship. Second is the religious education that is an inseparable part of their conversion. And in the end, the lack of personal safety and the persecution by the Israeli police is the reality of her everyday life. We will look into these 3 things to understand a bit more about the experiences, the lived experiences of Ethiopian Jews between Jewishness and Blackness. So we start with a strong Jewish identity. The people that you see in this photo are called Kes. They are the rabbis of Ethiopian Jews, and this is their traditional wear with these beautiful umbrellas. So, Yerus told me that the Farangi girls in her class, Farangi is a very important word, by the way. In Amharic, it means white person. So the Farangi girls in my class, she says, they think I pity myself. But every second I'm in that school, I'm proud to be Ethiopian. First, I have the perfect color. Second, I have my own tradition, strong roots, and a very special and unified community. My teacher says, what are the chances of being born a Jew? 1% of the entire world. So just think, what are the chances of being born an Ethiopian Jew? So Yerus sees her scarcity. She's the only Ethiopian in class. And she sees that by the same token that Jews understood their scarcity elsewhere. incredible and extraordinary uniqueness. Ethiopian Jews have a very strong Jewish identity. They trace themselves back to the lost Dan tribe that after the first destruction of the temple went southeast from Egypt, and its traces were later lost. Ethiopian Jews say that they are the descendants of the Dan tribe who wandered to Gondar and Tigray areas today. And that's where they cultivated their Jewish tradition. It is true when Yoel says that she has her own tradition. As you can see in this picture, the Jewish Ethiopian Bible is written in Ge'ez, which is ancient Amharic. And in fact, their Judaism is much more biblical based than it is based on rabbinic thought. They have a portion of the Old Testament which they sanctify. These are the 5 books of Moses, Judges, Joshua, and Ruth. And they have their own synagogues, their community practices, different and completing gender roles for men and women, and a lot of religious responsibility for women. One of the things that I learned from Rabbi Sharon Shalom, who lectured in this series last year, is that in Ethiopia, women did the circumcision for the boys in 8 days. And that was one of the reasons, by the way, that they weren't considered Jewish enough when they received Israel and when they arrived at Israel. Another thing that happens in Ethiopian Judaism is that the lineage goes by the father and not by the mother. And if you want to get married as an Ethiopian Jew, you have to count 7 generations back in order to make sure that there are no family relationships. It's a very, very special and unique community that cultivated its own Judaism for a long time. Now, up until the 19th century, the mid-19th century, European Jews had basically no idea or very little idea that Ethiopian Jews actually existed. When this man, Yosef Feitlovich, was sent to Ethiopia on behalf of Kol Yisrael Chaverim in the beginning of the 20th century, he was very impressed by the Jewish community that he saw there, but he left no doubt that they should learn from us, from whoever lives outside of Ethiopia and cultivate a Jewish tradition in their way. They should learn from us how to be Jewish. Their Jewish tradition is somehow invalid and not as right. At the same time, or a few years later, came the chief rabbi, Rabbi Uziel, before even the founding of the state, and looked into this case of Ethiopian Jews. He said, we cannot consider them fully Jewish according to the halakha. He made many arguments for that, but one of them was that their Jewish lineage goes according to the father, more biblically, and not according to the mother, which is how the halakha operates. At the same time, David Ben-Gurion, the prime minister, the first prime minister of Israel, did not include Ethiopian Jews in the big aliyah of Sephardic Jews from Middle Eastern and North African countries. He said we shouldn't be looking for political trouble in Ethiopia because Ethiopia was one of the only states that were willing to be allies of the young state of Israel back then, and they did not want to let go of these Ethiopian Jews. Only in 1973, when Rabbi Yosef became the chief rabbi, a Sephardic rabbi, he said and he acknowledged that Ethiopian Jews are in fact the descendants of the lost Dan tribe. And he founded his conclusion on correspondence or rabbinic correspondence from the 14th century. So only in 1973 were Ethiopian Jews acknowledged as historically Jewish. It still didn't bring them into Israel. And if there's one thing that I think can attest to the kind of Jewish identity that these people bring is the famous Exodus story, the first Exodus, not the second one, that they walked in the desert. This man, Ferede Aklum, designed a route through the Sudanese desert in the most dangerous conditions to bring all of his community and family members into Israel. This community walked in these dangerous routes and they lost thousands and thousands of community members, at least 4,000 out of 10,000 community members died along the way or in the camps in Sudan awaiting the Israeli aid. However, with all this journey of devotion and sacrifice and walking the desert like the ancient Israelites did, Ethiopian Jews were stopped at the border, and they were given an impossible choice. If you want Israeli citizenship, leave your Jewish tradition that you cultivated for so many centuries behind. Now, this photo is taken from a demonstration that happened in 1985 when those who walked the desert climbed all the way to Solomon's Hall in Jerusalem and demanded to be acknowledged and recognized as Jewish. You see already here, they are waiting for the unification of their families in 1985. In Hebrew, I translated the signage that says, "Chief rabbis, we are Jews, believe that we are Jews." And yet there was no leniency in that case. And Ethiopian Jews, at least until the 90s, not only did they have to convert to Judaism, the men had to be recircumcised to be given Israeli citizenship until community members revolted against this requirement of the rabbinate. So what we learn from this situation is a lot about what happens when Jewish law starts becoming a criteria for citizenship. And when Serkalem was telling me about this, she had her own take on this thing. She saw through the drill. Saying Ethiopians are not Jewish is the easiest thing to do when you don't want them to have citizenship, she says. Today, our school rabbi gathered all the Ethiopians and explained to us why all of a sudden the white man tells us to convert. I respect him, but I think that questioning our Jewish tradition is just an excuse. Every rule you bring from the halakha, there is always a disagreement about it. It's called machloket. It's easy to use the halakha to justify anything, but someone always disagrees. You don't want Ethiopians in Israel? Find a rule in the halakha. You do want them? Bring a machloket. But you can't say Ethiopians are not Jewish and that's it, because in the halakha, every question has two answers. So when Serkalem looks into this policy of the state of Israel, which still separates families of Ethiopian Jews, she says, Israel is not Jewish when it tells me that I am not Jewish. It says something univocally when in fact the halakha always is built on diverse opinions and on differences. And in that sense, she points out a tension between Jewish religion and the Jewish state. Now we move on to schooling. As an inseparable part of the conversion policy, which conditioned the citizenship of Ethiopian Jews, the children of Ethiopian descent had to learn a different kind of Judaism as part of acquiring an Israeli identity. The late head of the Chemed, of the Israeli national public school system of Jewish religion education, told me in an interview, they said we were Jewish. We said we don't know what you are. Jewish religious schooling was the compromise. And indeed, in the 80s and the 90s, children of Jewish Ethiopian descent had no choice but to be registered in the religious public school system in Israel. There is more than a religious one. There is a general one and a religious one, and a bit of a Haredi and Palestinian one on the sides. But Ethiopian Jews had to go especially to this place. There they had to learn a corrected form of Judaism, and that form of Judaism had to be taught at home because they did not want the parents and the school to kind of fight over the soul of the child. This is what the rationale said. However, as a compromise, it didn't really work for Ethiopian Jews. And this is what Wurkitu told us. I was 10, she says, when I got my first A+ in math, and I was the only one in class. The teacher got mad. How come she got it right and you Israelis didn't? I was so surprised. I was sure I was Israeli. Now, Wurkitu sees through a different drill here. She sees that everyone came to Israel from somewhere, Morocco, Germany, Russia, Poland, but somehow everyone becomes Israel. she is Ethiopian, and she does not become Israeli in the eye of her teacher. What is it that excludes her here? So, the experiences of Ethiopian Jews in the religious track of the public school system in Israel have reached the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. Pnina Tamano-Shata, she's a Knesset member from 2018 and the Minister of Aliyah and Integration currently. She spoke about the hardships that Ethiopian children of Ethiopian descent experience in their education system. We have become the punchbag of many, many educators who think in the darkness of their minds that they can hurt the physical safety and personal well-being of kids of Ethiopian descent and get away with it. Nobody fires those teachers. No one withholds state funds from schools that don't accept children of Ethiopian descent, and there are many. Ethiopian children are separated in classes, kindergartens, and schools. Separation is the best case scenario. The worst is blunt child abuse that no one is asked to explain. Pnina Tamano-Shata exposes a very somber reality. Most of the children of Ethiopian descent who go to the religious public school system go to different classes. They have their own trajectories. They stay for after school enrichment classes in Judaism. They receive a lot of extracurricular things, but all these things somehow help to separate them more. And in the end, they experience especially abuse from many of their teachers. Currently, not all Jewish Ethiopian children have to attend this school system. However, this is the prominent experience across school systems today. And that is what leads us to the last part of our presentation, which is being Black in Israel. And that I will let Alamish tell you what she meant in her own words. My Farangi friends, she says, and I live on the same street, but the state I live in and the state they live in is not the same state. What is Alamish talking about? So, on June 2019, Salomon Taka was sitting downstairs and having a beer with his friends. He was 18. A policeman off duty walked by the neighborhood and did not like him that much. He didn't know it would be the last day of his life right then. Yehuda Biadga was 19 when he was walking in daylight in Bat Yam, carrying a sharp object in his hand. He suffered from PTSD from his army service. A police officer shot him 16 times in his chest, and in this case too was released with no charges. Yosef Salamsa was 22. He was having a beer with his friends when the police received a phone call about noise downstairs. The policeman came, shot him with a taser, and his parents found him cuffed in the parking lot of the police station, naked and cold. A couple of months after that, after he said that the police had burned his soul, he was found dead at the bottom of a cliff outside and close to his residences. Nobody investigated his death. Nobody investigated the policemen that were on his case. And this mother says that also an Ethiopian child too wants to return home to his mother. And this reality that we look at in the news often, and in 2019 there were great demonstrations on blocking the roads most of the summer of Ethiopian Jews against this reality. Still, it's very far away from most Israelis. Warkitu wrote a poem about this. She says, I have nightmares. I scream out my soul. My brother will not be like Salomon Taka, like Yehuda Biadga. I have nightmares. But I can't tell this to my white friends, because when they watch the news and see what happened to Yosef Salamsa, they say, oh, it's so sad. But what do they mean by that? Sad like a scratch on your new car? Like a rise in the price of cottage cheese? Sad like missing the bus a footstep away from the station? Like getting a new shirt and the next day it's on sale? What's sad is that I know that one day this will be Addis, my little brother Addis, lying there on the sidewalk, and you will sit at home with a cup of coffee in your hand and say, oh, this is so sad. So sorry for waking you up from your beauty sleep. A lot of what my research participants, my ex-participants, end up doing in their everyday lives as Ethiopian Israeli teenagers is waking Israel from a sleep, not necessarily a beauty sleep, quite the opposite. What is our take from this complicated reality? Our take is that this and this are part of the same story, that Ethiopian Jews in their Black and Jewish identity expose rapturous tensions that aim to destroy the state of Israel and the Israeli society. And they expose how a Eurocentric approach to Jewish nationality and an Orthodox approach to Jewish religiosity placed dark-skinned immigrants beyond the scope of Jewish religiosity and made them the marginalized inhabitants of the Jewish state. We also note that this weakens the promise of Israel as the national home for the Jewish people. However, there is hope to learn about Judaism, Jewishness, and Israel, and to reinvent and redefine these things. The lived experiences of Ethiopian Jews in Israel amidst these tensions between Jewish religion, nation, and state can guide and teach Israel how to grow. The perspective of Black, Jewish, Ethiopian, Israeli young women is vital for this process. And we are very lucky to have this generation of young, fierce, brilliant young women who want to give it all to make this work. But meanwhile, we cannot forget that in Ethiopia, their family members have heard the word wait for years. And it has been ringing in their ears with piercing familiarity. And just like Dr. Martin Luther King said, this wait has almost always meant never. In this case, you see this woman holding a sign that says Tzedek in Hebrew, and this boy Melakama, who is 17 years old and wants to join his mother in Israel. In this case too, justice too long delayed is justice denied. And one of the things that we want to do is to see how can the Jewish world embrace these Jews where the state of Israel, even where the state of Israel fails. So this is us for now. Thank you so very much. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions.
Wow, Marva, thank you so much for that amazing talk. We have a few questions already in the Q&A box. I see that there's still 50 souls in the room here, so please feel free to add your questions as we go. But I'll start with what we have here. So this is a question from Maureen Libet. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And I think it's a question that kind of gets to the heart of some of these issues in your talk around a Eurocentric concept of Jewishness. And the question from Maureen is, non-religious Jews in Israel, such as Hashomer Hatzair kibbutzniks of the past, were still considered Jews without taking classes in any Jewish religious classes. So why should Ethiopian Jews have to do that? That's Maureen's question.
Well, thank you, Maureen, so much for this question. I need to write an entire dissertation chapter to answer it. I will really try to do it this way. So one of the things that I think your question is pointing out is this little discrepancy. Like those who, let's say, created the state of Israel and thought about it, like the Zionist thinkers were mostly seculars, right? Like they were people who had a very tense relationship with Jewish religion. They weren't necessarily religious Jews. They were in fact the Jews that said, no, we shouldn't wait for any Messiah. We should do this thing on ourselves and just go and be Israeli and make this part of our Jewish history come true right now. it had nothing to do with their religious practice, whether or not they observed Shabbat or not. And you are absolutely right that in Israel, when Ethiopian Jews arrived, what they had to do is somehow to prove that they were actually religiously Jewish. And the fact of the matter is that being a secular or like a secular Jew is something that is a privilege of only a few people, a few Jews in Israeli society. And I think that is like the Ashkenazi elite. How we see this reality is that a version of Jewish national identity as a European identity was sort of enough to trust that these people are Jewish, or like to understand that they join us in this national, historical belonging, cultural thing. When people come from Ethiopia, all of a sudden there's this distance that we need to bridge. And it's not a distance in religious practice per se, but because we don't have a different word for that, the word Jew notes also that sort of national or ethnic identity. So it becomes like a way to treat like the religiosity of these people and try to make them in a way more Jewish or more European or more closer to the Jewish model that we have through changing their Jewish religion. I think one of the things that startled me was to see, we didn't get to this in this lecture, but one of the chapters that I'm writing is actually about the school wear, about the skirts that these girls have to wear for their schooling. And I realized the more we talked about these skirts, how important it is for them to wear skirts so they will have Jewish visibility. So people will think that they are Jewish and that they're not refugees from Sudan who came here, that they don't belong. So everybody is talking in the same words, using the same words that are being Jewish. But in fact, I think that they are talking about two different things. And when the state of Israel demands Ethiopian Jews to be re-educated and to be re-educated in terms of their Jewish tradition, what they try to do is to bring them closer to a certain cultural model that is now owning what Judaism is. And the Ethiopian Jewish tradition maybe might help decolonize it. What can we say? Hopefully. But yes, what you notice is absolutely real. And it's one of the things that we're looking at.
Thank you, Marva. This is a question from Chris Lucas. He's wondering how are practicing Jews accepted in Ethiopia? So the question stands on its own.
So this is a very, very good question. The relationship, okay, so yes. Okay, so Ethiopia is a fascinating place, and a place with a very, very deep and ancient history of Christianity. It was Christianized as far as the 4th century. I think it was the 3rd or 4th place in the world to receive Christianity. And the relationship between Ethiopian Jews and Ethiopian Christians is very tense and very intense, because on the one hand, the version of Christianity that is in Ethiopia is very similar to some aspects of Judaism. For instance, Ethiopian Christians, they keep kosher and they observe Shabbat, some of them. And the only difference, or one of the greater differences, is that they believe in Christ, while the Ethiopian Jews believe in Jerusalem. This that you see behind me, this painting is actually the first comics ever from the 14th century. It's called the Qibra Nagist, and it tells about the story of Ethiopia as basically the new kingdom of Solomon and Sheba, and the place that has the new Jerusalem and the actual tabot, the actual tablets that the commandments were written on. So we see like a very deep connection and deep similarity in terms of what they believe in. However, in terms of their political reality, Jews in Ethiopia were persecuted like Jews everywhere else. They were named falasha. That is a term that was coined in the 14th century, and that in Amharic means landless wanderer. What it means is that they were forbidden by law to own or inherit land. So Ethiopian Jews could not stay put where they were. Some Ethiopian Jews lived in their own villages where they were a little bit more protected. Others lived in Christian villages and mixed villages, and their story was a little bit different. Some of them had to hide and conceal their Jewish identity to remain alive. Some of them had to conceal it not from their neighbors, but from their authorities. And all these little complications of how do you stay Jewish and safe in Ethiopia actually influenced a lot what happened later with Israel, because Israel, when it asks who is Jewish in Ethiopia and who isn't, it uses these lists that of Jews who were actually registered by the Ethiopian government. But not all Jews wanted to be known as Jews because of that reality of persecution. They were persecuted not only by Ethiopian Christians. There were many missions that came to Ethiopia from Europe, Protestant missions. A very prominent one was in the 19th century, in the late 19th century, and many Jews had to lose their religion at that time and return to it a few years later. But like they have been through quite a lot. And even the Ethiopian community that is still in Gondar right now, I can tell you that the kids, for instance, most of them dropped out of the regular schools because they are being bullied for being Jewish there, but because there aren't really any other schools that Jews can go to because most Jews have already made it to Israel. So right now they don't have a permanent job. They don't have a permanent place to stay. They cannot own land, and most people will not hire them for being Jewish. So it's this very strange thing that there is a Jewish community that is still living in a situation as if there's no state of Israel and as if there's no something else in the world. But yes, this is a little bit about the reality of Ethiopian Jews there. One more word, though, is that when we were in Gondar in 2018, one of the women who were hosting in the hotel that we stayed in, her name was Ilanit. And I asked her, why do you have this name, Ilan? It's a Hebrew name. And she said, no, I'm Christian, but my family, they have Hebrew, they speak some Hebrew. And I was startled to see how much Hebrew and many Jewish aspects or things that I recognize as Jewish were actually there in Ethiopia. And that non-Jews were taking on Hebrew names. So it's a fascinating interreligious thing that is happening there, and Ethiopian Jews carry it with them.
Thank you, Marva. This is a question from Florence Lewis. She's wondering, what did the original Israeli government, so I think this is speaking about like the first Exodus that you were discussing. In that period, what did the Israeli government hope to accomplish by bringing to Israel the Ethiopian Jews, about whom they seemed so ambivalent? So I guess it's a question about, right, so given this ambivalence, what other kinds of factors were at play here in this relationship between the young state of Israel and this Ethiopian Falasha Jewish community?
So it's a fabulous question, actually, and you know, one of the tricks that Israel does mostly is that they say, we brought you, we saved you, we took you, we did that. And the girls, when we're talking about this thing, this is one of the things that makes them most angry, because if there's one Jewish community that did not leave the state of Israel a single choice but to accept them, is the Jewish Ethiopian community. The man that we saw earlier, Ferede Aklum, he designed the route through the desert to Sudan without any Israeli official telling him that this might help him get Israeli citizenship, acquire an Israeli citizenship. Israel had no political relationship with Ethiopia in that time that would enable such a thing to happen. So he basically went around it and tried to do everything in his power to find himself in Israel. There is a movie that the girls hate. I don't know if I should recommend it or not, but it's called The Dead Sea Resort. And it talks a little bit about the kind of cooperation that happened between Ferere Aklum, the Jewish Ethiopian community, and Mossad agents to bring about this community to Israel. So the real answer is Israel tried to avoid acknowledging the presence of Ethiopian Jews for its first few decades, also because they were barely standing on its feet. I think it's very hard from where we are today to understand the kind of mayhem and chaos that happened in the first decades that Israel was founded. It was such a reality of uncertainty and emergency and sacrifice. Every other person, 1 in 5 people died in the war. They did not know how are we going to do this? Whatever Judaism was completely lost coherence when everyone came to Israel, and like you just don't find your arms and feet in that. So for as long as they could, Israel tried not to acknowledge Ethiopian Jews as Jewish, and it was reliant on the fact that in the Jewish world, in the halachic world, too, people did not treat them as Jewish because they weren't part of the centuries-long correspondence that changed completely the Jewish world after the destruction of the temple. But because they left them no choice, I think that once they were there, it was already impossible to go back. And to this day, though, I think you ask why is Israel so ambivalent? I remember one policymaker told me, "Oy if we say yes, and oy if we say no." Like as Jews, we are the last ones that can say to a Jewish community that we don't want you, or like we will let you suffer and die and in whatever situations you are in, and to suffer from anti-Semitism. On the other hand, Israel had no idea what to do with these immigrants when they came, because the distance between the absorbers in this community and the kind of cultures that they brought was just so harsh. I think that what happened in the end, and the real reason for Israel to take them, was that the political situation in Ethiopia in the 80s was getting worse. I mean, Haile Selassie was in the end of his path. He was murdered in the end by Mengistu Haile Mariam, who started his own dictatorship there. And the Jews were in real danger. And in fact, the card that made the difference for Ethiopian Jews was American Jewry. Still, without the activism of American Jews, Nakoch, and all those various foundations that American Jews did to shake Israel and to make it acknowledge these people as part of its people. So Ethiopian Jews wouldn't have been here, wouldn't have been in Israel. And still, as you can see, 8,000 Jews want to come to Israel. Today, they made a big fuss that 316 made it. Israel would rather not, but the pressure that comes from Ethiopian Jews, from American Jews, from people who have different perspectives on what Judaism is in our world today, they can and always do make a difference.
One question that's based on a reference you made to this film about the Mossad operation Anita Feinstein is wondering, as I am also, what about the movie did the girls not like?
So the girls did not like, now I'm not an expert in this film and I don't want to be too bad, but the girls did not like it, that it seemed like here are the Israelis coming with their airplanes and they're building with all their creativity and sexiness, and here they are building this big resort on the Dead Sea that is so beautiful, and they're running this action film and they're doing it all to save their lost brothers from Africa, when in fact it was the Jewish Ethiopian community that, without any guarantees, and you see it till this day, this sort of devotion, they were the ones to walk the desert, and they were the ones to arrive in that place on their own without any guarantees. Now, walking the desert means your grandmother, your little child, and it means like you're everyone together, and losing people on the way, and horribly enough, what happened and what this community remembers from its journey through Sudan is especially the sacrifice. That's families that survived the desert, all the burglaries in the desert and the cold and no water and no food. So they ended up dying in the refugee camps in Sudan from diseases while they were waiting for Israel to come. And Israel never came because this was happening and that was happening. So they came a week later, fine, and then a week later. So like the story is not as heroic and is much more mutual and is full of pain in ways that that movie does not capture. And especially it's an exodus that never really ended. And it wasn't as one directional as was depicted there. In fact, most of what happened happened thanks to those Jewish Ethiopian activists. And if you are interested in seeing a different representation of that, there is a beautiful documentary series in Hebrew. It is called Jerusalem. It has 6 episodes. The second episode is talking about the journey. And I think that there is even an English translation to that. The nuances and the sacrifice and the price were very important and left out of the film.
Thank you, Marva. This is a question from Obi Clark, and he's asking, do you think that Ethiopian Jewish history will ever be circulated amongst the Israeli academics as a prerequisite learning, so to speak? And I'm curious, more broadly, like to what extent is this history being taught, being discussed and learned in the Israeli education system more broadly?
So that's a very, very good question. And I think it's a very relevant question now because this is a changing of times. How Jewish studies academia treated Ethiopian Jews up to now, or traditionally, I think is not something that did any service to this community. The bon ton in Jewish studies was that I'll just tell you the name of the article by Stephen Kaplan, The Invention of Ethiopian Jews, 3 models for the invention of Ethiopian Jews. Up to quite recently, Jewish studies played a very prominent and disturbing role in taking the grounds of any claim of these people to be originally Jewish. They tried to use connections with Ethiopian Christianity and other things to show that in fact these are Jews that used to be Christians, but then they became Jewish, and then and now they want to be part of us, and that's okay. But it's like, so I think even though studies have been done with rigor and with good intentions and all these things, they influenced people's life in ways that are irreversible, and we see them now when people are still being discounted as Jewish by Israel. However, more and more, there are Ethiopian Israeli academics that are teaching this history, and are leaders of the community, both male and female, that are making a name for it. One very prominent person is Dr. Rabbi Sharon Shalom, who I've met at Berkeley last year also, and he is now teaching. He has a cathedra for the history of Ethiopian Jews in the Ono College in Israel. I know that in the Tel Aviv Museum, they're trying the Museum of the Land of Israel, they're trying to install like a permanent exhibition that tells the story of Ethiopian Jews. And in the library of Tel Aviv University, you actually find Feitlovich, the collection of that Yosef Feitlovich, who came to Ethiopia in the beginning of the 20th century, and shows like the pictures and the happenings that happened there. Still, a lot of that history is told from the perspective of like, oh God, so cool. We have these Jews here. We never knew that they existed. This is how we teach them to be Jewish the right way. And you see that in the pictures. You see that in the correspondences. And I think that now is a crucial moment for this history to be told by the people who own it. And I'm very, very excited for the young women that are doing this research with me to start writing their own pieces once they're out of the army and into their own lives.
This is a question from Rena Fisher. wondering, how have non-Jewish asylum seekers affected the dynamics at play with the Ethiopian Jewish community in Israel? Do different generations of Ethiopian Jews in Israel relate to asylum seekers in different ways? And I'll just highlight, with this question, it gets into some of these issues of Jewishness and Judaism and the nation state of Israel and these different facets of identity at play. So relationships between this Falasha community and other asylum seekers from the continent of Africa in Israel.
Yes, no, that's actually a fascinating question, because the relationship between Ethiopian Jews and other continental Africans that made Israel into their home is very, very nuanced. The first Ethiopian Jews, or like the Ethiopian Jews, yes, those who of the earlier generation, the parents' generation, I think they identify as Jewish much more as than they identify as Blacks, or identify with the phenomenon, with any phenomenon that is part of global Blackness. In their minds, they see themselves as Jews, and they found themselves in this place. Whatever happens in Israel, there was so much trouble in Ethiopia too. Here, you just you do what you're told, and you continue. When they saw that continental Africans, that asylum seekers are coming to Israel, they were like, wait, this is my place. There wasn't like a certain feeling of like camaraderie. Moreover, many asylum seekers come from Eritrea. And if you want a real drama, it's that the relationship between Ethiopians and Eritreans. And you can see that in Tel Aviv all the time. One of the boys that used to be in the music center laughed when he told me that he no longer rides his bike because everyone thinks he's Eritrean, because only the Eritreans ride their bikes in this way. No, he has to walk, or he has to wear his kippah. Like, he doesn't want to be in the same situation. I think that Ethiopian Jews have a liminal disposition in Israel. Like, they're both Black and Jewish, so they see, like, they see a world and a half. They see more than that, but it really depends on the person whether they see themselves as part of those of the struggle of asylum seekers to find their new home in Israel, or they identify with their earlier Ethiopian identity that says, these people in Sudan, they persecuted us and they killed my grandmother, and now you want me to like them here? So it's like, it's a very, very tense and complicated relationship. The more the Israeli police is violent towards people with darker skin, the more a sense of camaraderie starts to gather against the Israeli nation state. Like, when a sort of counterculture starts hitting. I remember Serkalem, one of the girls, told me that during some demonstrations, she was in Jaffa with a Palestinian friend of hers and a Sudanese friend of hers. And she was there. It was a tense political situation between Palestinians and Israelis, and the police car came, and she said, I didn't know who are they going to take, me, my friend Asma, or my Sudanese friend. And so there is that feeling of those who were spilled away from the cup of whatever it means to be Israeli. Sometimes there are allies there, sometimes like alliances, sometimes there aren't. I think that Israel is very torn, and there are very small communities that each has its own very specific story. And I think that some Ethiopian Jews are reluctant to just say, okay, I'm not here as a Jewish person, I'm here as a person, as a Black person, and this is my community and my struggle, and I extend it to many people whose situation is different. I think they're grappling the conditions, like how could I still hold on to the identity that I brought and still acknowledge this global movement and my part in it and my contribution in it. I think that they're really working it out in this generation.
I'm curious to hear a bit about relations between this Ethiopian Israeli community and the Mizrahi community in Israel, who are also so often have been referred to as Shorim, as Black people in Israel. And with this term Faranji, was that it?
Yes, Faranji.
Right. This Amharic term Faranji referring to white people. Is that essentially like a word that is used for all non-Ethiopian Jews, including Mizrahi Jews in Israel?
Yes, definitely. I mean, well, so first of all, it's a great topic, the relationship first between Ethiopian Jews and Mizrahi Jews, but also between the struggle of Mizrahi Jews and the struggle of Ethiopian Jews to be not only part of the Jewish nation, but the face of the Jewish nation. A lot of what we see in the Ethiopian experience is a sort of intensified example of what happened already in the earlier immigration of Mizrahi Jews. We said that, I mean, not sure I said it, but during the 80s, 95% of children of Ethiopian descent were sent to boarding schools, religious boarding schools. Now, this religious re-education was a tactic that proved helpful, or the only thing that worked with the immigrants from North Africa, with the Mizrahi Jews who came from North Africa. And right now, students of African descent actually form 90% of the student population in the religious track of the public school system. So the Mizrahi experience is different and similar in many ways. It's different in the fact that Mizrahi Jews are many more people. When they came in the 50s, they were there earlier, and they came in the 50s, it was 500,000 people in Israel absorbed about a million, about 1.5 million. They had to, all of a sudden they were the majority, and they didn't know how to, I mean, I think that the state of Israel was those who had the power and the privilege in the state of Israel was eager to help these people join. And at the same time, they were very much afraid to lose their dominance over what it means to be Israeli. You know, Israelis never existed like this before, so there was a big cultural struggle. But because Mizrahi Jews were many, they came with a lot of power. And in the 70s and 80s, we see the Black Panthers and we see the movements that they were trying to change the same reality that Ethiopian Jews are still dealing with. I think it's what Ethiopian Jews experience is a bit different because they are such a small community. They're less than 2% of Israeli society as a whole. And while Israelis blended into each other somehow, or even I think in terms of their visibility and their skin complexion, Ethiopian Jews right now, they're 16% intermarriage, around recently, but Ethiopian Jews are still distinguishable. And I think that because Mizrahi Jews are so many, and their discrimination in Israel in the policy institutes and in the higher education and the education school system, it was so deeply rooted in the founding years of the state that it became part of the infrastructure, became part of the reality in a way that is both blinding because everyone is now looking a little more the same, and it just became what was because nothing was there before. And when the Ethiopians came, things became much harsher, like the idea of separation of families and the police brutality and being sent to boarding schools. These things happen to Mizrahi Jews too, but like the extreme and intense example of Ethiopian Jews kind of brings it to a different level. Right now, there are alliances as well as trying to distinguish each other from one another. Some Mizrahi Jews don't want to be in the same boat of Ethiopian Jews, and they don't see themselves in the same, in the same struggle even. And I think on the other hand, there are many cultural influences that are overlapping. And I think that Mizrahi music, for instance, became such a huge resource for many teenagers of Ethiopian descent to create it themselves and to do it, just like rap and hip hop. So I think that it's one of those influences and inspirations that are part of their journey.
Speaking of hip hop and also jazz, because one of these expert participants with whom you've been working is also a jazz singer, which raises a question related to one we have here from Rachel Lotan. the question is, how is being Black in Israel different from being Black in the US? And of course, that's an enormous question that is unanswerable in some ways. But also, like, with that, I'm curious, and with the police violence against Ethiopian Israelis that you've been mentioning, in ways that in this era where of Black Lives Matter in the U.S. context, clearly with this with the influence of hip hop and like Black American music, can you say a bit about like perceptions of Black American culture and identity and struggles among these Ethiopian Israeli young people you've been working with?
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Rachel Otan, for this question, and thank Rachel Otan for supporting me and my studies and my dissertation work for the past year. It's been a tremendous source of support and inspiration. And of course, she just sends me now the hardest question to answer in the end. So thank you, Ochel. It's just like you. So yes, how is the experience of Ethiopian Jews different? You know, on both things, I mean, I can talk about it as a complete outsider, obviously. Like I think that one of the things that I realized when I came here as an Israeli was that I know nothing about Blackness in America. I thought I had some you know, some things that are thrown at you from outside, but America is also a lot about branding. And I think that I got to learn a little bit more. I'm now almost 5 years here, and I got to learn a little bit more about the experience of being Black in America. Still, my ignorance is much greater than my knowledge. But what I do see and what I can attest to first is a bit of a historical difference. That the Ethiopian Jews came to Israel as part of, or like they saw themselves as part of the majority, as part of the narrative. They weren't taken against their will, and they weren't positioned in a way that was so very hermetic. I think that in America, race as a system of classification is a powerful national asset, and in Israel, Jewishness does a lot of what racism does in America. And I think that in those terms, whatever history that comes with you having a different skin color, it changes like drastically between these two contexts, each very particular in its own way, because Israelis come with a variety of skin complexion, you know, like the difference between a Moroccan and a Yemenite Jew, and the difference between a Hungarian and a I don't know, German Jew is no greater than the difference between, for instance, an Ethiopian and a Yemenite Jew. And still the difference is the difference in citizenship status. It is the difference of educational opportunity. It is a difference of personal safety. And that's where I think that these experiences start linking, not in terms of what brought those of the histories that brought to the situation in the present, but the fact that that they are recruited to the role of the antithesis of society. I mean, many of the things that I hate hearing, and most Israelis that I talk to about this research, the first thing they say is like, of course they're not, like they're Black, they're not Jewish. And as if that is sort of an axiom. And I think that one of the things that we are doing in our research is to do this in a reverse logic. Like their skin complexion is like absolutely, you know, those differences are not differences of side, but in fact of an opportunity and of citizenship status, and many times a difference in life and death. And I think that this definitely speaks to the reality of Black people in America. And I don't know in terms of, you know, how do they see themselves as part of the national dream, and in what way do Black Americans consider their home in America as theirs and them in that culture. I know that Ethiopian Israelis crave to be the king. There was one beautiful rap song, which will go to your next question, that said, by an Ethiopian Israeli group that has a quote that says, "A system that doesn't see me as worthy will fall like Goliath when faced with King David." So I think that Ethiopian Jews see themselves as King David that will rise over whatever it is that is happening. And I think that in that sense, having Judaism as the operating mechanism of Israel is actually good news, because there is, as we saw, like the religion does allow us, and Jewish religion does allow us ways of breaking out of racial logics and breaking out of politics of otherness. And I think that these girls are seeking these ways. As for Black American culture in terms of hip hop and rap and jazz, all these things are tremendously powerful for many Ethiopian Israeli kids and teenagers. It's still a very complicated thing, because at home, their parents listen to music in Amharic. Ethiopian music is like its own completely different thing. Downstairs, they can listen to Mizrahi music if they want to be with their Mizrahi friends, and they can also listen to hip hop and to rap and to see themselves as part of that struggle. I think that many Ethiopian Israeli teenagers grapple with how is hip hop and Amharic music and Amharic prayers fall into the same identity framework. So that is a complicated thing, but there are many books that are being written on the affiliation of choice of Ethiopian Israelis with cultural manifestations of Blackness in America. And I know that in our music center, jazz and whatever jazz brought us and whatever blues brought us became a hugely important thing, and very inspiring and emboldening and helping with resilience.
Marva, Shalev, Marom, thank you so much for joining us today. We can't wait to read. I can't wait to read your dissertation, and just these young women you're working with just sound fascinating. And I guess we should all look up System Ali to check out the music of one of them. But just thank you so much for this work you're doing and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you so very much.
And thanks to all of you out there who have joined us tonight. Stay tuned for more upcoming programs, but we appreciated being with you here this evening. Laila Tov, good night.
Thank you.